Good morning. As usual, you can see I've spent many, many hours in makeup, making sure that I'm absolutely pretty, absolutely looking like the fantastic package, because it's so important that news and truth be packaged prettily. The reality matter is reality is neither pretty, and neither am I. So you get the raw news, and that's how it is. Okay, so this morning I woke up this morning, pretty big news day already. So we're just going to give you the highlights today and ramp our way through it because after this I go and actually get on with things like the important things like coffee and my rest of my day. But basically, to cut and chase this, I woke up this morning at approximately between about 3 and 4 o'clock, and I just one of those light bulb moments. And all these things have been going through, and I've been busy putting out magazines and doing all sorts of things. But somewhere in the back of my brain's been going tick 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 tick. And it started off with DBL, so you're out there, thanks Debbie, sending me a screenshot of basically C-130 Hercules heading down to South Island, pretty much the same flight traffic and pattern as 5 other Learjets had headed down to the South Island. And you normally get about one Learjet, maybe two a day that you kind of see. You don't need to get that kind of, that's a kind of an unusual level amount of traffic. And maybe again I will check in with Debbie during the day to get a bit more background information on it, because at the time it was just one of those things. Like I said, I'm doing multiple things at the moment. It comes into my feed, goes into my in tray doth runneth over, and so that was bang. And then at that time, at the same time, I started to think about, I've been touring around the whole North Island and South Island at the stage. And a lot of places I'm going, there are choke points where they've set up for roadworks. You don't really pay too much attention. But the thing that caught my eye, and it's actually, I noticed this as early as Christchurch, the Kaikoura earthquakes, and not the bit that I'm about to talk to you about the cameras, but in terms of putting roadworks and choke points. So in the case of the Kaikoura one, they put it in a place where you can't go right because you drive into a cliff, and you can't go left because you drive into the ocean. So they're putting these sort of roadworks and significant choke points around the highways around the country. So have a look for yourself. Take photographs. I mean, that's the way that we do this thing, and this collaborative citizen journalist thing. I say something out there. I give you a reference point of where you find that information. You go and look at that information. Get off your asses. Go and look at it to verify, to make sure that Uncle Ben is not telling Billy TK killing Alps fibs. It's easy to make big claims if you don't have to back them up. So you go there and you take a photo of that. So choke points are these Ministry of Work signs popping up, and they're largely unmanned, and what sort of distinguishes them is that they've got a little gate area, and in the middle of it there's the CTV cameras, and up on the pole, normally about one pole, 2 or 3 of these cameras on top of it, multiple lenses, and that's I'm pretty certain is ID recognition software. And I actually noticed them back again in Christchurch when they started springing up that big banners advertising. I looked into them. They went to an Australian company and then they disappeared down a hole. So again, they have a sort of a spooky feel all over them. On that note about the planes heading south, of course, what I've reported in the shipping news number 12 was the big Five Eyes meeting that they held in Queenstown on September 11th, coordinating with the exercise Pitch Black. We're now having I knew from my previous experiences during the lockdown when they were having a big Five Eyes exercise. It was like kind of like stuff where they were testing out new kind of technology which allowed them to like go look for people door to door, and I'd pinned it down and I'd got some good footage from it. But every time I went to the various ministries and to the Official Information Act, they'd come back going, and you could almost hear the bastards smiling, going, "There are no such exercises being held in New Zealand at this time." And I'd be like, "No, that's but there." Right back, trying to word it. There are no such exercises being held in New Zealand at that time. And then I discovered, of course, what was actually happening was the Five Eyes exercises were being coordinated actually in the UK. So when they were going, there are no such exercises being held in New Zealand at that time, they weren't lying to me. They just weren't revealing the fact that, yes, that exercise was being held, just wasn't being technically held in New Zealand. So this is the same situation, big Five Eyes exercise taking place. This one's happening in Singapore. I think it's exercise Suma. Again, I haven't done the deep dive on it, but what that's happening at the same time that NATO is now coordinating and holding their annual nuclear warfare exercises, which I can't say they don't have annual warfare exercises because I've never looked, but it is a first on my wave. It's happening at the same time that according to, same thing when I literally woke up 3 o'clock in the morning, the guys that I do consultancy work for in London, woke up and said, "Hey, what the fuck? Prime Minister's just been summoned to Washington," and so again, that's not even on the news feed yet. So we will find out down the road whether or not that was authenticated information, which will become authenticated, or it's. I mean, the guys I'm working with in London. They, like they are clients, and I haven't been working for them for that long, so they're still in the newbie material. So, but that's all I'm saying is the synchronicity is that they woke up saying shit's going down in England, so we'll find out. I had a look at it, couldn't find anything on the line about that, but what I did notice, which is kind of like an incidental but a significant incidental, is that the current Prime Minister, Tass, which I mean, they're changing so quick, I'm struggling to keep up with them, has now been sidelined, and she's the Prime Minister but not in power, and her rival is now basically running the Conservatives in England, and the first thing he's done is he's turned around and taken her post, tax cuts, and sidelined them. Because again, if you notice, when Italy moved to the far right, one of the remarks that was actually stated at that time was the one of the economists turned around and said, "Well, we're not too worried about that. Italy's very, very much in debt, and they will behave." Because they have, they need to appease us if they don't want their debt issues to get even worse. I mean, if that isn't a mafiosi exercise, I don't know what is. And it always goes back to my thing I've been saying about, the essential thing that I would wish anybody that ever seen anything I've done took out of me, and only were allowed to take one thing. I'd say go and watch the documentary, Someone Else's Country. It really breaks down to how New Zealand really works and what our economical history is. And this whole idea of that we think we vote Labour or National is nonsense. Why we're in debt, the people that we should be protesting against is not, number one, the terrorists of Wellington, the Beehive. It should be the building that my grandfather, I'm very proud, he was a forward observer in World War II, came back from World War II, set up his practice opposite number 2, the terraces, which is the Treasury, because my granddad, being a forward observer, knew that he needed to keep an eye on the bastards. And, so being a good FO, he made sure he put himself right on the sniper's line to see who would walk out the front door, and most of them were probably his clients anyway. No flies on my granddad. So moving along from that, the situation was the UK Prime Minister has been literally gone to the US, Washington. Washington is just currently at the moment trying to pass through emergency declaration, which allow them to effectively be on a full military footing, which allow them to really ramp up their spending for the support of the Ukraine situation. All the sort of the traditional headlines are telling you that the Russians are losing the land war, blah blah blah. And when reality is the current attacks, which are now like making a big deal of the fact that they're linked to Iran, so now Iran gets to be attacked as well. Evildoers. But that was standing as, even though Russia's losing the land war, they've just turned around and basically decimated about 75% of the Ukraine's electrical grid line. So now Ukraine is facing an energy crisis that will have an immediate flow on to both of Europe and as I said to you, I mean, economically, we're seeing that the UK is Prime Minister gets up and says, "Oh yes, we'll make sure that you don't pay so much taxes," and he just gets sidelined and summoned to Washington. We will not be doing that, Miss Tass. The principal wants to see you. And at the same time, of course, the sad side about all this stuff is that you literally, as I said, you're seeing Italy is going to the far right. UK is moving from centre right to something that, I mean, I wouldn't call it far right, but it's sure as hell not the hippies. Your Ukrainian countries are basically, far right. Speaking to a Polish guy the other day, trying to get a feel on the Polish countries, and he said basically they're kind of like us, the neoliberal that they are. Well, actually, not the opposite. He said on externally, he says the Poles actually preach quite a right wing line, the politicians, but he says internally they actually provide quite a social. The workers have quite a bit of clout in Poland because of the whole role that Solidarity played in the basically bringing down the Soviet Empire. But yeah, it's on the surface they're falling in a lockstep with all the other allies and European allies and moving to the right, which is what I always said to you was about the situation with the Putin phenomena was and all these things is that the outcome for all the people who are lefties are going down with Putin is they're not really reading the long curve and realizing that this is actually really as Bill Maher said, the right are playing the long game and the left are busily squabbling over the colours or the packaging on their peanut brittles breakfast, and not really getting all the things that they're actually supporting are actually really, really, really working really well with that far right agenda. So good one, boys and girls. Benefits of a classical education. Okay, monkeypox transmissions are now up to 23. They're talking about isolation payments. They're talking about moving in the background, not the beehive, but the health officials are talking about return to red flag situations. The point I will simply make out about that is that if you remember during Shipping News 12 or just before then, I turned around and looked at the Queenstown situation with having big festivals in there, and I looked at the fact that coincided with their it all happened at school holidays at the same time, and this is also coordinated at the same time that they were getting large transmissions in Sydney. And when you look at Sydney, Queenstown, the demographics is that 90% of that population for at that time of the year come from Sydney. And I sat there going, do you want this to happen? And I said that this fear said you'd start to see it emerging basically late September. Well, August the 23rd, we're now getting those numbers actually up, and they're kind of forming. I mean, it's still really, really, really early days, so I may be wrong, but it is so far forming the pattern which I called back in September, and it basically boils down to this. If you remember this point, when I come back and say I told you so in 2 months' time, was that just like the COVID at the beginning, when again I was hacking, giving them a hard time about that, and actually getting a bit of response, they turned around and said, you want to be testing. In fact, back in the festival period of Queenstown, that's when they should have been testing. And now it's August and they're getting community transmissions and they're talking about it. They're talking about doing testing. So once again, like COVID, it'll be a day late and $1 short. And when you look at that situation, having gone through that exact experience beforehand, so it's not like they can claim this time around, we didn't know. It's either utter, sheer, outright incompetence and someone's head needs to be severed off their shoulders, or it's intentional, in which case somebody needs to be lined up against the wall and shot. And I'm being quite literal, because what's going on here is so mind-bogglingly stupid, because you knew there was this event taking place, you knew there was a risk, and you did freaking. It's like Jaws. It's like knowing that you've got a killer, you've got a 1,000-ton killer shark in the water, and you don't decide to put up a shark notice. That's how the analogy I draw of how absolutely stupid. So if this particular event boils into crisis, it'll be a crisis of their own making. Mention exercises, SUMA, and that's SUMA is the Five Eyes, just in case I didn't underscore this beforehand, SUMA that's taking place in Singapore right now is a Five Eyes command structure exercise. So again, going back to my original point about the OAIs that I did for these Five Eyes exercises during the COVID period, this is very, very similar. What I don't have in front of me, and I'm on the road, so you're going to have to do your own digging. But if you look at the National Emergency Management Agency and you dig around there, and I think it's Operation Guardian is the one that you need to look for. But if you bring those actually up, they've got an events section on different military, disaster scenarios occurred, and there will be one that says for disinformation, to prevent disinformation before the elections, which I'll come back to in a second. And then there is another one that says about a biological threat. They don't specifically, what I'm struggling in my mind via visuals is I can see them, but I can't see whether they're in the same box or they're divided or in the same month. But I definitely know that for this period now, which is literally, I had been on my get round to tray, I was going to turn around and do an OII to Official Information Act and try and do what I did last time with getting information about this exercise, which turns out to be that it was being held, but it was being held in the UK, and they just walked around. Well, this one now, if I was going to do an OA, I'd be saying, are we involved in these civil defence exercises that are currently being held in Singapore? And then see how I respond. But you've got a 20 working day turnaround with an OIA, so you probably by the time that you should get it out, it's probably a bit late. But I said I do know that this is coordinated. This Five Eyes Command Centre exercise in Singapore, SUMA, is being coordinated at roughly about the same time that the National Emergency Management Agency is holding an exercise of Tier 3, which is basically Prime Minister levels and above, which is looking at disinformation and potentially also biological warfare. The briefing that President Biden gave this morning basically went on about nuclear strikes and blah, blah. And again, I point out the situation. The neocons originally launched the concept of the tactical nuclear weapon as a first strike option as being an acceptable policy. They put that chess piece on the board. Okay, everything else has been tit for tat backwards. They do that, Putin does this, da 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 da. So up until now, it's been about nuclear, but in the very last paragraph that Biden talks about he talks about Putin was willing to use biological weapons options. I have never, and again, I don't read every single newspaper briefing, whatever, but to the best of my knowledge, I have never seen Putin talk about willing to use the deployment of biological weapons, which is not to say that Russia doesn't have them, because my previous research, which goes all the way back into this field to back when I was at university, is that Russians have a very, very good biological warfare. But in saying that, I'd also look closer to home with people like Alexander Kuzmanov, working as the strategic planner up in Waikato, who is the author of a book called Biological Espionage, because he once upon a time actually used to work for the KGB in biological weapons, and he's now working out in the air in New Zealand, handling our water. Obviously, again, we've got the three-war situation. The government's having a bit of a pushback there, and they're basically saying to the government, well, to Auckland, if you go say no to free waters, then your rates are going to go up, and trying to scare the ratepayers and pass the costs on to them. It's the dilemma of the three waters is that, number one, the people that are against three waters, which predominantly acts national, blah, 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 keep forgetting that Rodney Hyde introduced that legislation in 2010, versus the fact that all water privatisation, which is following basically the model that we did with electricity, will follow exactly the same situation. We will bring these private companies in to manage it, and then turn around and find not too down future that the people managing it are now 51% shareholders of the thing that we brought them in to manage. So the dilemma is, how do you deal with the water phenomena without it turning into basically someone's private gold mine and protecting the water integrity? I don't know, but that's the conversation where both sides are actually in agreement. Nobody wants the water privatised. What no one's actually discussing is how we actually have our cake and eat it too, how we make sure that we've got the water to meet our demands. And again, our immigration issues, the problem is that we've brought a lot of people into the country, which I don't have a problem with per se, other than we didn't build any infrastructure for them. So you look at places like, Waititi, which are like the building explosion there, but they've got the same level of pipes and same level of toilets to deal with now 3 times the population. It's again this thing of, you're either really, really dumb or you're deliberately setting us up to fail. And I'm cynical, so I tend to lean towards the latter. SUMA taken care of, monkeypox taken care of, nuclear exercises been taken care of, Prime Minister on the go. So I think that's about it. 20 minutes of news that's not pretty by a guy that's not pretty. Have a good day.